Alrighty, and welcome to the next episode of FinOps Friday. Today we are going to be talking about metrics that matter with Mr. Mulartrick. Eric, do you want to give us a quick introduction of yourself, your background, and what you specialize in?
Sure, Nathan. First off, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Eric Malartrick. I work for a company called Boomi that was previously owned by Dell, but is now on its own. We are the leading integration platform as a service vendor, and you can leverage us to automate your business processes and connect those people to the business processes in all areas of your business in an automatic fashion. Now, about myself, I am a FinOps lead here at Boomi, and I am the sole person responsible for what's called FinOps, and I've been doing it for about 3 years. And I am actually looking forward to expanding the team to 2 additional resources coming soon.
Awesome. And it's always interesting to hear from our guests. What were you doing before FinOps? Like, what was that job that got you into FinOps, and how did you stumble across FinOps?
I was the director of infrastructure operations for Boomi. I've been in infrastructure operations for most of my professional career, and I came to Boomi to do the same thing. And this is a true story. One of the funny first items that I had to deal with was in our previous vendor that we used for data center or infrastructure hosting. They charge you, of course, by the infrastructure, whether it's running or whether you're using it or not, and it's running. So what happened is we accidentally had left a DR test on for a while, and then went on vacation. And
What's a
I
while?
start.
A while is an hour.
It was no, it was a long time, unfortunately, and that was my first lesson learned almost into FinOps. We got to pay attention to what we're doing because you are indeed paying for it, whether you use it or not. And it was a definite learning experience. Dovetail to moving into AWS, which is where we have landed as of, I guess, about 3 years ago now, almost 4 years. We moved into AWS and then quickly discovered that, hey, you know what? It's a little bit more expensive than we had anticipated, and our tagging strategy wasn't in existence at that point in time. So it was really hard to understand, what costs were going where. We had, sandboxes and non-production environments, and then a production environment. And really, I could not tell you, who was using what within non-production. Within production, it's a little bit more easy to understand because
Yep.
we're somewhat of a pretty static configuration, or we were at the time. And I knew where those costs were going, but R&D on the non-production side was very, very difficult to understand.
Yeah, like 101 FinOps is just the same that everyone has. All right, so let's talk metrics. Metrics are great. They help you to understand where you actually are in terms of your journey, your process, also where you're heading, and help you to be able to understand when and where you need to take corrective action. They can also be a complete waste of your time, mislead you, and be complete and utter red herrings. Do you have a big focus where you are, Eric, on metrics in your business in general, like not just FinOps, but metrics-driven company as a whole?
Yes. And one of the metrics that I really latched onto about a year ago was just unit costs. What, for example, is a unit of business within our organization and what does it cost? Because traditionally, when you're working with cloud service providers, I don't know about you, Nathan, but I see spend that just continues to go up and up and up, which, if you don't have a unit, you can't really tell if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And really where it comes, where it becomes very powerful is, say I have, 5,000 clients out there and my cost is X. Well, what happens if I go to the cost, or what happens if my clients, double and I have 10,000 clients now and my cost has also doubled? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? But at the end of the day, if you break it down to that bare unit and you can see your client growth going up, likely you should see a decrease in your cost per whatever, your cost per client, which would indicate to me that, we are going in the right direction. We are actually having more business come in and our unit costs are actually going down, which is showing me that, like I said, we're moving in the right direction. And it gives you some fodder to be able to push back on the folks who say, well, AWS is too expensive. You got to go decrease the cost, right? At the end of the day, I come back and say, well, look, our unit cost has been going down. Do we need to decrease the cost? What about you,
Yeah,
Nathan? In your experiences with data and metrics, what have you encountered in your experiences from what is a good metric to track, as you're starting out in a FinOps journey?
yeah, no, 100%. And that was the story of my life when I did work at a cloud vendor. It was exactly that. There was the cloud saying, come to the cloud, it's cheaper, it's cheaper, it's cheaper. The other message was, oh, so much innovation, so much agility, you can do so many things. So customers would go there and that they would see exactly what you saw, that their bill was increasing because they were doing this innovation. They were doing more than what they were before because they simply couldn't do it with the constraints. So that was always the thing. I'd go out to a customer, work with them and say, hey, your bill is going to go up, full stop. What you need to understand is why. Is it because of the innovation? Typically, that's exactly what we saw. You're doing more things. You're doing things that you could not do before, building more features, servicing more clients that you couldn't possibly get to. That was years out of my life, helping customers understand that it wasn't a bad thing. And it was also great to be able to go to the engineers and try and get them to empower and take on that metric so they could turn around when somebody that wasn't sort of aware of this was way back in the day when sort of FinOps was quite early on, there was separate FinOps and a separate IT. So FinOps would come down because they weren't really involved with IT. There was no relationship. Come down with a big stick saying cost, cost, cost. They could turn around and say, hey, we're actually getting good. So 100% there and in, well architected. That was what cost optimization was all about. Business outcomes at the lowest possible price. It wasn't getting things cheaper. It was outcomes at a price point. So yes, 100% aligned. And that is the thing that, is the sort of that concrete set in stone metric that we need to go towards.
Right. And you mentioned innovation. And I like to hear that because, in a heritage data center, in a legacy infrastructure as a service provider that may take time to be able to deploy new infrastructure because you have to wait for, say, systems to actually appear. If you can now build out anywhere and immediately start servicing new customers. For our example, when we moved to AWS, we were able to grow out globally very quickly because we built our infrastructure as code and we were able to run more or less, scripts to stand up the new infrastructure leveraging CloudFormation templates. Because of that, we were able to start recognizing revenue in other countries that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And that is the beauty of the cloud, right? Our spend has gone up, yes, but so have our customers. And that's what really matters here.
Yeah, like some of the great examples, customers used to have online real estate, the amount of features they could do, videos, all the things that they just could not do before. There was an airline company. They needed a supercomputer for a day so that they could calculate weather patterns to know if they could make a flight. They couldn't buy a supercomputer and do a calculation and let it sit there because it's too expensive.
Sure.
Whereas now with the cloud, they could actually do that. Supercomputer for a day, pay for a day, run the simulation, say, hey, we can make this leg with the weather patterns that it was. Like, it's just not possible at all in a business sense before cloud. Really, really interesting.
Don't forget to turn it off when you're done, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Which also is the beauty, If you don't need it anymore and you're done with it, goodbye, and then you don't have to spend or pay for it anymore.
Of course. In terms of metrics, what have some of the metrics help you achieve in your business? You mentioned the unit metric. Are there other metrics? And what has been the business benefit or even, cultural benefit from some of those metrics?
Sure. So again, I mentioned these unit metrics that we have. We were able to look at some of the unit metrics that we have for a certain product line and take a look at it and understand where we could make some opportunities to actually improve the efficiency. And by looking at that data and understanding our unit data, we're able to go through and right-size some of the environments that we had out there. And we greatly impacted that unit metric just by making a few changes to a few environments that we had out there. But if we didn't have that data, it's cost data at the end of the day. You just see your costs going up, which is fine. But at the end of the day, if you can tell what one incremental unit is going to cost, you have the power to really make those decisions about, should we spend a little time to optimize this environment? And we did. It's been greatly beneficial to us just because we have that data in front of us and we track it.
So, and I like the fact that you're able to take a business decision and analyze, is this worth doing and spending time on versus other things. But so the unit metric was able to help you focus on an area of your platform or in your greater system. It helped you find a specific area to focus on.
It did, yes. We looked holistically because it's a simple application at the end of the day. So we focused just on like the key infrastructure metrics, just using CloudWatch data, for example, and then identifying like, oh, do we really need to have it at this size, given our current footprint? And we were able to make those decisions about to shrink them and make it a business case. Like, all right, it's going to take us a couple hours to shrink these systems, but it's going to lead to X, Y, and Z from an improved efficiency metric. At the end of the day, it was a no-brainer to go ahead and move forward with the efficiency opportunity increase, which greatly impacted our unit metric. But if you don't have the
Nice.
data, then you're flying blind and you're kind of guessing if it makes sense or not. Which is, if you look at like right sizing in general, right, that's a very basic exercise where you're matching the resources to the demand. But if you can spend some time just changing instance sizes, perhaps, like that might be some of the best, most easiest ways that you can get some efficiency gains within your environment, just like we did.
Yeah, dropping instance size is typically half the resources, half the cost. It's a great value there. Not asking you publicly to fall on your own sword. Maybe you have a friend. When have there been painful, or when have metrics been painful and utterly useless and potentially driven negative outcomes or been gamed incorrectly? Yeah, when have metrics fallen flat for you or one of your close friends?
Well, so one of the common FinOps metrics that I see is reservation or savings plan coverage and utilization. Well, yeah, yeah. But at the end of the day, you can, as savings plans and reserved instances, move around. Well, savings plans primarily move around. They will latch on to the most expensive item first to save you the most, or not the most expensive item, the item that will save you the most money first. But the further and further covered you get, you may start covering resources that are going to save you 2%, 5%. Is that worth the spend that you've locked yourself or committed to? Or are you better using that capital elsewhere? That's my pet peeve metric. But if you have like a very static workload and very predictable, then you may be just fine using it, but you have to be careful, is my point. And Nathan, what about you? Have you ever experienced any metrics that have caused you to go down rabbit holes to scratch your head and like, was this a good decision, a bad decision? What are we doing?
Yeah, it's you bring up my pet hate. I appreciate that. For anyone that knows me or has known of me, I am fierce in terms of utilization and coverage rates, percentages of commitment, discounts. That's been my jam. I have very strong opinions of it. And I think it really is, those metrics for metrics' sake. Somebody will say, somebody will publish, hey, 80%. And you think about it, you're like, 80% because it covers most and you've got that little bit of wiggly variance. Like 80% feels good, feels right. And whenever somebody presents you something, I would always thoroughly check, why not 79? Why not 81? Why is 80 the best number? Give me the data or show me why it's that. And you never get an answer. And that to me is the perfect indicator that it's metrics for a metric's sake. Feels kind of good, but we didn't get to the moon on feelings.
Right.
If
Well,
I think back,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, jump in, stop me when I
was
need to
going
be
to say
stopped.
that to add on top of that, if you're a growing business and you're constantly adding new customers or new regions or whatnot, and your AWS bill is going up, is 80% good, or should you be higher because you're growing and confidently that you're going to be able to reserve more, assuming that it makes sense from a cost of capital perspective?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people are going to say, well, hey, Eric, cost of capital. Well, we do no upfronts. So you don't actually have an upfront, some vendors only provide a no upfront model. So, hey, like I'm not putting anything upfront. Yeah, but you're making a commitment. There is a risk there. I think the complete absence of the word risk has been appalling when it comes to things like commitments, because there is a risk there. Like you talk to any finance basic, what is my return? What's the value going to be? Well, what's the risk of me being able to achieve that value and the return? If I channel my days back at Well Architected and Brian from Ops, the very first principle in Well Architected, well, what are your business priorities? And your metrics must be aligned to that. What is it that your company is driving towards and wants to do? If it's growth, then as you said, 100%, you can go quite hard. But making sure that any metric has to be focused around what you as a business or organization are actually trying to achieve. If it's not aligned to that, chuck it in the bin or just deprioritize. Don't worry about it now. So I think making sure your metrics matter to your business. They're not just some abstract way of measuring for measuring's sake. It's something that somebody that's not in IT will actually care about. Yeah, enough ranting from me.
Now, if you think about this, though, I guess one of the reasons from like a coverage perspective would be like, or I guess the risk would be, what happens if we make a big right sizing decision or some improvement to the architecture and my, spend is going to go down and I'm overcommitted. If you're a growing business, that's likely not going to happen to you, I would assume. But, your unit cost should go down if you are certainly tracking them, which would be a good indicator that you're moving in the right direction. And always, to quote Mike Fuller, who is on your show, he likes to talk about, metrics being pretty pictures without targets. If you have no targets on there, what is it at the end of the day? It's a pretty picture. If you have those targets on there and understand your targets and align them to your business goals, then you can track and see how well you're doing versus your metrics. And it can be an indicator of, or we're making the right investment decisions in X, Y, and Z, or no, maybe we need to change course and reevaluate where we are.
Yeah, and I think, I'll concede a slight amount of ground. An arbitrary metric may help drive behavior as long as that is sort of set correctly. Again, if it's just arbitrary or for arbitrary's sake, then I'd say there's some issues there. But if it has set towards a known value or something that's been potentially understood over time, then it's not a bad thing.
Right. But if you don't have anything, you're starting from square one, what are some, in the AWS FinOps world or any cloud provider, what are some good places to start from tracking KPIs, even if it's just data, having better information about what you're doing within the AWS or whatever cloud provider environment. You can tell we use AWS. I keep mentioning it by name.
Each of the vendors have a well-architected type of framework. So I would start to, and we were cautious when we developed that, to not sort of have it as a scorecard. It's these are the best things you need to be doing. So I'd sort of start as that. It's always a good start with some best practices. What is your priority? These are things we should be doing. Then the metrics and the goals, well, how much of that do we want to do? How do we measure if we're doing that correctly or not and what's acceptable to us? So I think in terms of getting started, understand what you should be doing and start to build that capability. I wouldn't probably, one of the first best practices was setting your goals and KPIs. That's around your business. And maybe your first goal and KPI is to understand what the best practices are and learn them. And then iterate, go deeper on top of that. I would typically, if you're early on your cloud journey, it's about focusing on doing the best practices. I think metrics could potentially be a little bit distracting if they're not well thought out. Like if you're early on, I don't think it's feasible to have perfect metrics for many parts of business. Of course, unit metrics, yes, but others maybe not.
Right. And I mean, if you're talking about, cloud providers in general, there's the concept of modernity, right? How modern are your instances? And I know you may poke at me a little bit because some older instance types may actually be cheaper when you reserve them compared to brand new ones. But having just an understanding of modernity, where you stand, are you using, R5 versus R6G? Maybe that's a bad example because that might require a re-architecture within your organization. But just to show case in point, how are you tracking towards achieving a goal? Say you set a goal for 80% R6G. How do you track that goal at the end of the day? Well, you can start looking at the data, understanding where you stand with less than R6G, and then start tracking as you start changing instance types throughout your environment, for example.
Yeah, and that's a hard one to track. Looking at, you're going to start to take in trends, industry trends over time. And I think that was one of the things I wrote in one of the last papers was in terms of legacy. Like it's always expensive, and to remove legacy, it's always going to be an expense. There's no fun. But today, now is the least expensive time to get rid of your legacy. So the longer you leave it, the more legacy it becomes. Potentially, the harder it is to find people with the relevant skills to be able to unpick and migrate it. So it's got to be that balance and trade-off much larger than, cloud costs and FinOps. That what are the industry trends? Is it possible? And in terms of sort of going back to your original question, I normally say, you should be checking, is there value in doing something? And that really is the metric. If you go into things like commitment recommendations or right sizing, is there anything there I can execute that will deliver value for my business? There's no recommendations there. You don't need a metric for it. Is there anything worth buying that will give me a value at low risk? No, don't do anything. Right sizing, is there anything going to give me value of the effort I will invest? Yes, there is. Well, then do it. So that's sort of
come up with
where
the plan, the business case for what it would take to right size to a different plan. I keep emphasizing the business case aspect, but if you're looking at modernizing your application or re-architecting the serverless, build that business plan. Showcase what, if you can, how many hours it's going to take to accomplish X, Y, and Z. Showcase the cost savings, assuming that it's going to save you some cost savings, or even to make it a step further, showcase, is this going to impact the way that my operation runs, such as using serverless? Well, I no longer have to patch these servers. I no longer have to upgrade or reboot it when it goes down. That's all taken care of by a managed service provider. It may cost more, but at the end of the day, are you actually saving yourself time where you can work on driving that business value and adding customer features that are going to bring in more business?
And I like just stepping back. We seem to be saying the word business incredibly frequently.
Right.
So we're
not
talking
cost
about
optimization so much.
yeah, exactly. Like there's not many words of dollars or cost, and I think that's really important. We're talking about metrics, and we're continually saying business, business, business. I think we've covered what a unit metric is. Eric, what's the difference between a non-unit metric and a unit metric, and why is a unit metric so important versus a regular non-unit metric, I dare say?
Like a non-unit metric would potentially be like, again, coming back to the RI coverage, or what percentage I am on R5 versus R6G. It doesn't really tell a business story, whereas the unit metric is going to tell more of a business case. If I add one customer, it's going to cost me $10. That is a known quantity, and you could potentially use that to leverage changing your pricing model. Say you're a very static, monthly cost type of vendor out there. What if you can understand your unit costs and come up with a better pricing model for your business that may make your costs cheaper at the end of the day, which allows you to bring in more customers because your product is now, more, I guess, cheaper at the end of the day. So that's the difference. That's the way I look at it from a business decision versus non-business. I keep coming back to business. Here we go again. More business.
Yeah.
But unit to me is more business. I mean, you can have unit metrics for like, what is my cost per CPU or something like that as well. But again, I like to tie mine back to the business as much as I possibly can.
Exactly. And I think it's from what you're sort of saying there as well, unit metrics are that prime goal, are the foot in the ground, sort of, you can't go past it, you can't argue with it, that is the perfect metric. These other metrics may not be as strong as long as they don't detract from that unit metric or give you a difference. If they're not aligned with that the unit metric, then there's a problem with those. But having them, you sort of said before, in terms of modernization, you may have a goal and a driver towards modernizing. Well, there's a metric for that. It may not necessarily correlate strongly, but it's not going to fight against the unit cost, unit metric.
Right. It may help the unit cost though at the end of the day, because if I switch to all R6G from R5, then it's going to be 10% cheaper or whatever the pricing is. Then that may greatly impact my unit metric. It really depends on where I'm using that infrastructure, and if it's servicing customers at the end of the day.
Are there some good metrics that are not that unit cost unit metric that you've come across that have been very helpful and useful?
Of course, the reservation cover. Just kidding. Just kidding. I like to look at, as I mentioned before, modernity. How modern am I? I like to look at. I'll go back to like GP2 versus GP3. GP3 came out, I don't know, a year and a half ago or a year ago, I forget when. But if you've run some performance testing on it, you may encounter that maybe it's as performant and it may be sufficient for your application to run on. I like to track and make sure that we're moving forward with GP3. Same thing with do I clean up my snapshots? Do I have a snapshot policy?
Waste is always bad.
Waste I define as something that has no business value, none. Like I could delete it today and it would have no impact to the business. Little story that I'd like to share, given we've had AWS for a while, but we indeed have had snapshots out there that have persisted for years. This was a while back now, of course, which I had made sure that we removed all of them, and it was 50,000 snapshots. It was quite a bit of them, but just making sure that you're cleaning up snapshots, or at least having policies and some sort of governance around having snapshots or having certain instance types, so on and so forth. At least that's my world.
Yep. For our viewers, we're talking about GP2, GP3. They're a specific storage type on AWS. So just modernizing, making sure you're moving from older generations, previous technology onto newer technology. Something which is really interesting with the cloud, it is typically cheaper to move to the newer types and versions of particular resources. You'll also typically have less operational issues as you're getting onto the newer hardware, which is refreshed more frequently. There's more of it as they decommission the old one. So general modernization, that's what you're there on the cloud to do anyway. So it's aligned with that business practice. You mentioned.
I was going to chime in once more. From a cloudability perspective, another thing that I like is scorecarding from how elastic you are, and from the right sizing perspective. I've used those particular metrics or data to show back to the engineers on how elastic they are, how right sized they are, as well as providing them with the information, of course, on what they can do to improve both scores.
The elasticity is an interesting one. And that was one thing I changed previously. It was always, for years, it was, make sure you match supply and demand. And I sort of took that, well, hang on a second. What about buffering? Smoothing out those peaks, deferring processing, delay, things like batch jobs. You don't have to just throw resources when you've got something.
Cron jittering?
Exactly.
Have you ever heard the term cron jittering?
No.
Spreading out your cron jobs so they execute at random intervals, as opposed to going
midnight
off,
every night.
Exactly, midnight every night.
Yeah.
I'm sure AWS or any cloud provider deals with that all the time, because cron jobs run on the hour, so every hour happens, and then every customer has their cron job kickoff at 12 o'clock and then 1 o'clock, causing you AWS or you GCP to need to have more resources on hand.
Yeah. So it was always, to me, after that, it was, manage the demand. See if you can modify that demand. Maybe elasticity, just saying blanket elasticity is good. Like, well, what are you doing? If you're, a mechanical facility that just has, messages every second, there's no elasticity in your requirements. So elasticity is of no use at all to your organization. So when you spoke then about elasticity, are you looking at sort of your incoming workload elasticity and then sort of matching that with your resources?
Two ways. I'm looking at it from a perspective of, number one, how good am I at following the demand that my workload requires and is thrown at it? And then two, In non-production environments, we like to turn off things on nights and weekends. So how good are we at turning things off on nights and weekends?
Yeah, awesome. All right, so we're going to take a quick break now for our speed round questions. This is where we ask our guest a couple of non-FinOpsy work questions to get to know them a little bit better. Eric, are you ready?
I am ready.
Alrighty. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yes.
Beetroot on burgers, yes or no?
No.
Cat person or a dog person?
I love dogs, but I also have 2 cats, so yes.
Treading carefully. Red wine, white wine?
Oh, white wine for me.
Beer or spirits?
Beer.
Do you ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
I ask permission. I'm a permission guy.
Your favorite movie, director, producer, genre?
Oh man, Shawshank Redemption for me is my all time.
Not many arguments there. Tea or coffee?
I live in the United States. You can probably take a guess. It revolves around Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks, though, usually, and it's the coffee variety.
American brown water. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Your favorite TV series, genre?
Oh man, for me, it's got to be The Wire. That was definitely an amazing show. Most recently, I've been getting into actually Ted Lasso is the most recent one, which I've enjoyed. And I watched Narcos for the first time recently. Also loved it.
Nice. Favorite song, musician, genre?
Oh my goodness! Now I've been all into '90s alternative. I feel like it's been like that since the '90s, but that's my go-to. And then I realized like that was 30 years ago now. So it's almost like oldies now, right?
Yeah. You turn on the golden oldies. Your favorite food?
Oh, steak, easily.
Holiday, do you prefer to be doing activities or relax and do nothing?
I like to relax and do nothing, just do the family thing. That works for me.
Buildings and architecture or nature?
Ooh, nature for sure.
Your preferred superpower, supernatural ability?
I'm really good at connecting people. I just, I like building relationships and connecting people together to enhance those relationships. I think that's my superpower for sure.
Nice. Your favorite vacation location?
What is that, man? Come on. Like, it's been a while. So I've been to Alaska 4 times. That's been my spot. My aunt and uncle live there, and my cousins. They've since moved from there, and we had a pandemic, so I have not been able to get back there since 2014. But you'll typically find me at the shore, the Jersey Shore, in Ocean City, New Jersey, with my family.
Nice. Do you prefer to text or talk?
Text.
Your childhood nickname, if it's safe?
I didn't really have a nickname when I was a kid, so I'm kind of boring. I can tell you my nickname now is the Grinch, though, if that helps. The story behind that, too. But, yeah.
Your proudest moment?
Oh, man. Definitely. So the birth of my son and my daughter, are always going to be the most proudest achievement of my life. I can't believe I have kids, but they are incredible, and I love them so much, and my life revolves around them. My son is 6. His name is Ethan, and my daughter is soon to be 2. She is Olivia, a pandemic baby. Not
superb. Baby. yeah, exactly. All right, you did well on a score of 96.4. Very respectable.
Did I really? Well,
yeah,
what's the KPI measurement for this scorecard?
Viewers, see if you can work it out.
Okay.
It's a complex algorithm, I'll say that much.
Sure.
So we'll take a break and call it quits for this portion of the show. Come back next week for the next episode of the show, and we'll see you then.